What is up, guys? Welcome to episode 10 of Rock the Dragon, a Dragon Ball Daima podcast. Of course, I'm your host, Tim Bridgewater. Here we are. We finally made it to episode 10 of Dragon Ball Daima. We're exactly halfway through the mark now, because as I currently understand it, which I don't keep track of the actual show news because I don't want to read spoilers, but I'm 98% sure that Dragon Ball Daima is in a 20 episode series that has already ended in Japan at this point. And now we're actually officially about halfway through ourselves. And if you listen to the past couple episodes, you already know that this stands to be the final episode of the podcast, at least for the foreseeable future, or, until further notice, sort of a thing. Obviously, this is my podcast, so I reserve the right to return at any moment or any point in time if I feel compelled or inspired to talk about a future episode. Maybe 6 episodes from now, there'll be an episode that I just feel really compelled to talk about, and I'll just come back and talk about that episode. I'm definitely sort of burned out on the weekly sort of thing, though, for many reasons that I talked about in the previous couple of episodes. So if you missed that by some chance, go back and listen to episodes 7, 8, 9. I feel like I broke it down probably a little bit too much. But yeah, for foreseeable future, final episode, here we go. That being said, do not have any emails to read for this week. No additional news to really talk about. I'll say this. We're obviously about halfway through Dragon Ball Daima at this point. You guys know that I have not enjoyed much of what we have seen so far. We are starting to see some shifts. I mean, it seems like they're starting to kind of sort of really push the story in some interesting ways now. And that includes this episode where we get some backstory on some things, and they do move the narrative and the plot along a little bit. So it seems like, we may be past the point now where it's mostly filler bullshit episodes where nothing really happens. So hopefully that continues to happen throughout the remainder of the series. And hopefully any of you guys that are still watching Dragon Ball Daima will continue for the next 10 episodes. And, we'll see what happens. At the very least, maybe it'll be a worthwhile watch as we move toward the second half of the series. So that being said, I'm just going to jump into the episode talk. Okay. So, of course, this episode of Rock the Dragon, a Dragon Ball Daima podcast, is going to cover episode 10 of Dragon Ball Daima, which is titled Ocean. Now, we've been talking about the episode titles every episode because I felt that it was a very interesting choice to do one-word episode titles for Dragon Ball Daima. Dragon Ball Super did not do that. Dragon Ball Z did not do that. Pretty sure GT didn't do it. So there's something about this decision to use one-word titles for this series for me that, at least when I first saw that, I figured, there's some level of symbolism or something behind these titles. It's not just a random sort of thing. It's going to have some kind of parallels or some layers to it or something like that. And man, it seems like that has just not been the case whatsoever. So maybe just another classic case of me giving the writers and the folks at Toei a little bit too much credit, because I don't think that that's what's happening here at all. I'm not sure why this episode is called Ocean. If someone else has another theory here that I'm not aware of, you can still send me an email. I mean, you can send me an email at rockthedragonpodcast@gmail.com. And if I decide to return at some point, then maybe I'll read it. Or, it's okay to just email me and just give me your thoughts on things. And, I'll still respond to you. Now you might be saying, well, Tim, clearly the ocean was the ocean with the Kraken, right? There's a couple segments in this episode where they're flying over a body of water and there's a Kraken monster that comes up and tries to eat them. Well, it is stated specifically in the episode that is a sea, right? Not an ocean. So if it's supposed to be referring to that, well, the episode refers to that body of water as a sea. And they say that multiple times. Not to mention that I believe in general mythology and folklore, because obviously the Kraken is a mythical creature that I personally know from Greek mythology. But it's possible that it also exists in other, other mythologies as well. But it's usually in the sea, not the ocean, right? So I don't know what the hell this title means. So we're just going to move forward now before, because I'm harping on something probably a little bit longer than needs to be harped on. Okay, so the episode starts. Now, if we recall from episode 9, the very end, we have the birth of a new Majin, Majin Ku, which, if you listen to the previous episode, you know that I just really hate that name. I mean, I don't, if this series as a whole was much better, this probably wouldn't bother me as much. I feel like I'm making a bigger deal out of this being's name than I normally would, but it's just another thing on top of all the other shit that I haven't really liked about this show. So yeah, now I'm going to nitpick the shit out of it because I don't think for one second that this character needed to be called Majin Ku, because I mean, it's just a blatant attempt at triggering some sort of nostalgia by trying to tie him into Majin Buu. And there's no connection there. It just doesn't. He could have been called Majin something else, anything else. They could have named him anything. Maybe the fact that he's kind of made using a Cyberman seed, they could have somehow called him Majin Saiba or something, or Majin Saibu or something. Well, no, let's get the Boo part out of there completely, because we don't need that. It's not the, you know what I mean? But here, anyway, they don't waste any time thrusting this character into the fight, okay? Because we know that Arensu's first order of business here with this character was to make him fight a Tamagami number 1, which I guess right now we can assume that this is probably the strongest of the 3, because it just seems like that would make sense. Goku already defeated the third one. Majin Ku is fighting number 1. So it seems like if they're going in order, seems like he'd be the strongest one, but this is Dragon Ball, so they can make up whatever the hell they want. Maybe they're not going in any order at all, and maybe the second one is the strongest one. But this is clearly going to be the strongest one. This is going to be the final one that they're going to have to fight. And they show us pretty much how strong this guy is through his fight with Majin Ku. Okay. I have to say this. While I was not thrilled at this idea of this, well, okay, let me back up here. I don't have a problem with the Majin character as a character, right? Hey, they made Majin Buu. It stands to reason that they can make another one of these things. The Dragon Ball world makes up its own rules. There are wizards and people who can do all kinds of crazy shit, and they just make creatures who already somehow know how to fight and have abilities, and they know martial arts, and they know how to talk and speak and walk and make jokes and have senses of humor, even though they were just born like today. But that's not an unprecedented thing in Dragon Ball. I mean, we've gotten that plenty of times before, so that's totally fine. It's also okay that this character is kind of silly too, right? We've seen silly villains, we've seen silly characters in Dragon Ball. And honestly, the fact that he is kind of goofy and it makes me feel a little bit better about his existence at this point, because I almost feel as if they tried to take him really, really seriously, then the character just wouldn't have worked. Because for one thing, they called him Majin Ku. So to me, I'm already rolling my eyes immediately when I hear that name. So if they would have tried to position him as some badass, super strong fighter who we're supposed to take very, very, very seriously, I feel like that might have been the wrong move to make. But since they're making him a little bit goofy anyway, then it makes me feel like, okay, well, maybe it's okay that they call him Majin Ku, because maybe he's just a knockoff version of Majin Buu, and maybe that's the point, Because what we see of this character in this fight is not that impressive. I mean, certainly not against this Tamagami, right? Maybe against one of the Z fighters, he actually would stand a chance. I mean, we don't know how strong this Tamagami is. So yeah, we get a lot of silly looking shit from this character, but this is not anything that we have not seen in Dragon Ball world. And, you know, him being part Cyberman might have something to do with this, because those things weren't, as far as I can tell, they really didn't have any level of intelligence. They were just kind of mindless little creatures. So, you know, maybe that somehow ties into this. I mean, we get some pretty decently choreographed fight stuff here. Obviously, everything looks great animation wise. No questions about that. I have to say this. I really like the look of Tamagami number 1. I mean, generally speaking, all of these Tamagami design wise look pretty good, I would say. You know, it's a shame that they don't feel like they mean more to the story at this point based on 10 episodes. They're just kind of these hurdles that stand in the way of the characters getting in Dragon Balls. And not every single character and every single thing needs to have a backstory and character development and stuff like that. But there's only 3 of these things, and I just think it would have been cool to dedicate about 10 minutes of one episode just showing their creation and really explaining that. Now, with that being said, we still have 10 episodes left. We could still get that. Not to jump ahead too far, but at the very end of this episode, we see that the Namekian who created these Tamagami and the Dragon Balls is still around. I forgot his name because I don't think we've seen that character since maybe episode 1 or 2. But we can still get that. We can still get some more fleshing out, especially if that character encounters the Z fighters and maybe he and Piccolo have a conversation or something like that. Who knows? Who knows? Anyway, so we cut back to Pansy and Glorio and Supreme Kai, or Nahare, and Goku, and they're going back to Sir Warp again because now they are trying to get over to the second demon world so they can challenge the Tamagotchi number 2. And we are quickly reminded that Supreme Kai has this ability to make Goku's ears stretch out so that he looks like he is from the demon realm. Now, we saw him do this before, right? And I don't think I really made a big deal out of it. I don't remember, but I'm going to make a big deal out of it now, but only because there's been several instances in the past few episodes where they were so concerned about Goku being spotted and identified by, you know, the demon world inhabitants, the gendarmerie. You know, they're talking about his spiky hair and the kid with the red stick, and now he has a Dragon Ball, so they're kind of trying to, you know, they're covering up his hair with a hat and all this kind of stuff to make him look differently. And then they bring out this convenient thing that Supreme Kai can do, which is make his ears stand. Okay, well, why didn't you do that sooner, Supreme Kai? And as a matter of fact, why not just have Goku's ears stay like this the entire time they're in the demon world? If you're so worried about people recognizing him, and if you can manipulate his ears, then certainly you can probably manipulate his hair too, right? I mean, it just seems like that wouldn't be too far out of his abilities if he can do this with his ears. So why not just change his hair too? if you really don't want people to be discovered. I mean, look, it's kind of a nitpick, but once again, the writers don't do themselves any favors when they introduce these kinds of things in the story, because if you want any level of consistency in your world and in your storytelling, then you don't do things like this. You don't create plot holes where they don't need to be. Okay, now this isn't a plot hole. This doesn't affect the story really, but it's certainly a little thing that it makes you say, well, why didn't they just do this earlier? The same thing with Goku having instant transmission. I mean, there's several moments in this episode we could have used instant transmission. You know, like the moment where they're shot down out of the sky. Instead of sitting there and waiting until they get shot down, he could have instant transmission out of the thing, destroy the ships in 20 seconds and been done with it. Now I get it. They're taking liberties. We have to suspend our disbelief because they're trying to tell a story where Goku's a kid, and you can't have him doing all that stuff because then it just becomes a little bit unbelievable that a kid will be able to do all this and they want to depower him and etc. Well, then the answer to that is you find a story-based reason why he can't do those things. And they kind of did that with the heavy air. Okay, even though I wasn't crazy about that, they did that, and it was whether you like that reasoning or not, at least they tried to explain it, right? And we'll come back around to that a little bit later. But with a lot of the rest of this stuff, they just didn't even attempt to explain it, so it stands out more. It just takes you out of it a little bit more. Okay, so anyway. And then there's this whole idea of this pin code thing. We talked about this before, right? As far as them having this gendarmerie plane, that apparently means they needed a new pin code, which they very, very easily got. And Sir Warp is saying, hey, you guys aren't gendarmerie. And Pansy just says, well, we're not, but we've got a family who are. And that's just it. This is it. He just says, makes sense, I suppose. Fine, be on your way. Okay, now here's the thing. Once again, could come across as a nitpick. It's not a nitpick, though. When you're building out a world, things have to make sense. You can't contradict yourself. You can't just create things that don't mean anything for no reason and then expect us to get invested in your world. If it's this easy to get through the gate, then why have a gate at all, right? Why have a pin code specifically for regular travelers and gendarmerie? Why? And you need a gendarmerie ship, but apparently you can just make up whatever you want at the gate and they'll still let you through. So then what's the point of any of this? I'm just asking these questions because I don't understand from a writing standpoint why they even decided to have these security gates between each world if they don't mean anything. And they don't mean anything if you can just make shit up and get through anyway. Right? You would think in a story like this, they would find a creative way. Okay, we have to go through this portal. We have to go through this gate to get to the next world. Okay, what do we need for that? Well, we need a gendarmerie plane, and we also need a pin code. Okay, how can we how can we have a creative way of them obtaining a plane and a pin code? And then that's how you build your story out. And then you find a cool and interesting way story-wise to make them obtain the plane and obtain the pin code. They didn't do that. They got the plane because their plane got destroyed. That's it. And then they got the pin code by calling up someone who gave them a pin code. And it's almost like they didn't even need it anyway, because when they get to the gate, it's just, doesn't matter. You guys are not gendarmerie, but we're gonna let you through anyway because you have a family who are. Whatever. Now, this next part brought me questions because it made me feel like maybe I was missing something here. There's a conversation here. There's a moment where Supreme Kai says, hey, we have a gendarmerie plane and a pin. We could just go to the first demon world. As long as we have the opportunity, shouldn't we make use of it? And Pansy says, good point. And Goku says, but we'd be skipping over one of the Dragon Balls if we did that. Meaning, if we went straight from the third demon world to the first, we'd be skipping the second demon world. And we just have to come back to the second one anyway. So we might as well go there now. At least that's the way I interpreted it. Right? And Supreme Kai is saying that since we have a gendarmerie plane and a pin code, we should go to the first demon world. Now, did I miss something in the story where they said you had to have a gendarmerie plane in order to get to the first demon world? Because that would be the only reason that this conversation would make any sense. Because otherwise, both of them are right and both of them are wrong. Because it's like, it doesn't matter which world you go to next. You need both Dragon Balls. You need the Dragon Ball from the first demon world and the second demon world. So who cares which one you go to next? So I'm not entirely sure why Supreme Kai felt like, oh, we should go to the first demon world. Why? Why not just go to the second one? What does it matter? And then Goku's argument, we should go to the second one. But I'm not understanding story-wise why it matters which one they go to next, because they need both Dragon Balls. So who cares? So why waste dialogue? Why waste minutes of an episode talking about something that doesn't seem to matter? Now, the implication here is that they should take advantage of the fact that they have a gendarmerie plane and pin code right now, because they need that specifically to go to the first demon world. Then I guess it would make sense that he suggested that. But also, I don't remember them ever saying that, and it stands to reason that they would still have this plane after they left the second demon world. Of course they don't, because they lose it to this Kraken. But at the time, they wouldn't have known that. So it just seemed like a pointless little debate that just didn't matter. Once again, I don't know everything. Maybe I'm missing something. Goku's still calling Glorio the wrong name, which is really, really worn out its its comedic potential by this point. I'm just realizing I just really don't care for this scene, And then Goku even says, "Oh, and also I am still kind of worried about Dende." Well, they make it sound like it's such an afterthought. Oh yeah, that's right. Dende did get kidnapped against his will, didn't he? Huh. I am still kind of worried about him. Are you? I don't think you are, man. I don't think you're worried about him at all. And then Supreme Kai says, well, no, I'm sure it's fine, because if they took him and he's still alive, then they must need him for whatever they're planning. Where A, you don't know for a fact that Dende is still alive. Okay. B, even if he is still alive, maybe they're torturing him or something. You don't know. And C, even if they're keeping him alive for whatever they're planning, you don't know what it is they're planning. So why wouldn't you want to stop that? Like, maybe that's something big. Maybe that threat is much bigger than them getting the Dragon Balls right now. I mean, it just seems like a bad decision from a Supreme Kai. I mean, isn't it your job to protect shit? What it really feels like to me is that the writers forgot that Dende was kidnapped. So they decided, they said, oh shit, oh, that's right, we have to mention Dende here somewhere. So then they wrote it in real quick, and then they completely dismissed it again. That's what it feels like to me. So they decided to just move forward to the second demon world, which I've lost track of what the objective here is. At one point it was to rescue Dende. At another point it was to get all 3 Dragon Balls, and they were going to use the Dragon Balls to rescue Dende. But now it seems like they're trying to get them to turn back to adults, or maybe both. I don't know. It's just unclear. What is also unclear right now is why exactly is Bulma and Vegeta and Piccolo them even here? Because, whatever reason they came to the demon world was long forgotten, because it took them so long to get here. And now that they're here, they're really doing nothing. They're doing nothing. They're just flying around, doing nothing. So they're still in this plane, talking about stuff that just doesn't, just reiterating things that we've already heard. We get some conversation from Hybis and Bulma. I guess you can call this a little bit of a funny moment while Hybis, asked Bulma to be his girlfriend. I mean, I don't know. Once again, in a show that's wasted so much time so far, it's hard for me to find this kind of stuff funny or entertaining. If most of the series had been entertaining so far, then I wouldn't mind little things like this, them just kind of being funny and goofy for a few minutes. I mean, after all, Dragon Ball is known for that as well. But here it just doesn't really feel that, funny to me, because what you've presented here as a whole just isn't very entertaining. So it's hard for me to get excited about little one-off moments like this. Sure, isn't fun to watch Vegeta get mad when someone messes with Bulma? For sure. But what we get here is just a lot of nonsense. He's just talking about Vegeta's haircut and the fact that Vegeta doesn't want to be a child anymore. The plan is to use the Dragon Ball so they can turn back to adults. And somehow in that conversation, Hybus, comes to the conclusion that if he's insistent about being an adult again, then he must be a boob man. Yeah, that's an actual joke. That's an actual statement that this character makes in the episode. He says, "I'm guessing you must be a boob man." And I had to watch that again, and I said, well, what? Based on what? Based on the fact that he doesn't want, because this is what I'm gathering from it. Hybus is saying that because Vegeta doesn't want Bulma to stay a child and he wants her to be an adult again, that he must be a boob man. I don't see the connection there. I mean, I guess if you look deep enough for it, you can find it and say, oh, okay, well, because, I guess when women are adults, their boobs get bigger. But it just seems like it just seems like a really dumb joke that just doesn't fit. It just doesn't connect. It's not a natural sort of connection there. Like, you have to stop and be like, well, what? It just feels like a poorly written attempt at humor here. And also, isn't this show supposed to be for kids? I mean, hell, if they're going to talk about titties and boobs, then we might as well just go ahead and bring back the blood, the severed limbs and all that other stuff. So we go back to Majin Buu versus this Tamagami, and we just get more of his, techniques. And I mean, I guess the whole point of what we're supposed to gather from this is that he's just trying his hardest to fight this thing. I think that's what we're supposed to take away from this. This whole sequence, I hope the intent is just to show how strong the Tamagami is, ultimately. Because he's not doing anything against this thing. He's just doing all these silly looking attacks and, once again, like I said, I don't mind it completely because we do have characters in Dragon Ball that act like this. Gotenks has some pretty ridiculous looking moves. But also it's a fight sequence and you can't go wrong with that in Dragon Ball, A nice little fight sequence never hurts. So they make it to the second demon world. And we get a realization from Goma that they finally made it, or they made it there. They made it to the second demon world, because, man, he's just now coming to the realization that they're even there, even though he can just apparently watch anything whenever he feels like it, whenever, through that weird portal or whatever that is in his throne room. And okay, I said I was going to come back around to this, and that is the fact that apparently the thick air, the heavy air, is just not a problem on this world. Just gone. Now you might be saying, well, yeah, Tim, they're on a different world now. So what's the big deal? Well, I'll tell you what the big deal is. We spent the first entire half of this series with that being a thing and that being a factor and all the fights and all the flying. And they use it as a story element to justify them flying around in a plane and all this other shit. And now all of a sudden, it's just gone. It's just not a thing anymore. It's just gone. Yeah, we're on another world now. Forget it. Yeah, this world has normal air. Okay. So, as I said before, it was just a bullshit reason to depower Goku and to make them and to give these characters an excuse for taking longer to get to their destinations so they can drag this series out for no reason, or their reason was just to drag the series out. The truth is that they didn't have a story. They didn't have a 20 episode story. What they probably have here is about an 8 episode story. But someone at Toei decided 8 episodes isn't enough. We want to keep them, subscribed to Crunchyroll for at least 20 episodes for money, right? Because, come on, guys, let's be honest. Only about 2 episodes that we've seen so far has actually meant anything story-wise here. If you took all the story moments from the past 10 episodes, you'd probably have about 2 episodes worth of stuff. The rest of it was just a bunch of bullshit, right? So, yeah, right? So now, since they decided now it's time to push the plot a little bit faster. So, let's just make it so where this demon world doesn't have heavy air. Okay? Doesn't matter that was a big part of everything before. No, it's just gone. Okay, well then tell me immediately why you guys haven't left this plane. Why are you still flying in the plane at this point at all? Okay, now coming back around to the Krakens, right? That are in the water. Once again, this water, for all intents and purposes, is a sea. It was referred to as that. So, I'm not sure why the name of this episode is Ocean. But then they also get attacked by more gendarmerie. So these guys are back. So all of a sudden, the plane is getting bombarded with attacks from these planes. And maybe I missed it, but I don't think that there was really an explanation as to why they were attacking this plane. I mean, I guess the idea here is that they realized that this plane was stolen somehow. So maybe word got out about it. Maybe I missed that part. But as I mentioned before, none of this should even really be happening because from what we've seen, both Goku and Glorio are more than strong enough to beat these guys. And, the plane gets shot down and Goku says, hey, hurry up and open the back door. And then he decides to fly out and go do something about it. Well, he could have done that 3 minutes ago and stop the plane from getting shot up. You know what I mean? At this point, all I can do is just ridicule the fuck out of this show because I'm sorry. That's just what they set themselves up for. Okay. But it's always fun watching Goku whoop ass as a little kid and he's tossing, a few energy waves and energy beams, key blasts at the ships. And, he takes them down. Pretty easily, but we already knew that was going to happen. So it just feels like another excuse to slow down the story, along with this Kraken. To me, this Kraken doesn't serve any other purpose other than to kill time, to make it a little bit slower before they get to the next Tamagami. And you might say, well, Tim, that's the way stories work, right? We have to drag it out. We have to make it worthwhile. We have to put our characters on an adventure. We can't just have them the next episode be there, right? There has to be a journey, of course. But good writers can make all that stuff in the middle make sense and be interesting and entertaining without it just being a mindless hurdle thrown in their way. And that's what these are. This gendarmerie, mindless hurdle. This Kraken, mindless hurdle. I mentioned this about the previous episode, and that was the whole thing about the Dragon Ball being stolen. That was an example of a good hurdle. That's a pretty good story element. You can slow down your story while still telling another story, right? And that Dragon Ball being stolen and them having to go get that back serves 2 purposes. Not only is it a hurdle for them to overcome, to proceed on their journey, but it can also be its own story because they have to figure out, well, who stole the Dragon Ball? Why did they steal it? We have to try to get it back, right? Now, they wrapped that up way too quickly, but they could have made that entire episode like that. But we're not getting that here. We're just getting a Kraken that just really serves no purpose, just a random creature during the route, okay? Now, we cut back to Goma and Degasu for a moment, and I did want to mention this. First of all, Degasu just looks awesome. I just love his design. I love the way all of the Glen characters look, the Kais, they all look really, really cool. in my opinion. But I'll say this. I'm really hoping that in the next 10 episodes, we really get to spend some time with Degasu. Because right now, he's just a minion. He's just a henchman. He's just a assistant. He's just the bodyguard. He's just the guy who stands next to the villain, right? And that's totally fine because every villain has that guy. But if you're going to make this specific guy a Glend, right? Which we're learning a lot about this episode about being very, very special, and B, Supreme Kai's brother, then that needs to mean something, right? Now, so far, it hasn't. You could take that character out and replace him with a completely different species of character, and everything will remain the same. Because unless I'm forgetting something, he has yet to provide any real insight into anything to Goma, that would help Goma. The idea would be that, oh, that's my brother, right? I know the way he thinks. So they're probably going to do this, and this, right? Because there's a connection there. But they haven't done that. They're barely even drawing attention to the fact that they're related, So once again, what was the point? Hey, I'm sure they'll come back around to it at some point. But they're taking too long, okay? I want to see more of that vibe. Anyway, so we'll talk more about all of that once we get into this little flashback. But there is this whole Kraken thing. I'm not going to talk too much about this Kraken thing. It's just, to me, it's just another hurdle that they introduce for essentially no reason. And it's just an excuse for them to lose their ship or the plane here because the writers decided they didn't want them in a plane anymore. Okay, I mean, that's pretty much it. We get this scene where Goku rescues Pansy, but it's it doesn't, none of it feels real. None of it feels like a real threat. The whole time I'm watching it, I'm just thinking, Goku, why don't you just chop this thing's arm off? You're Goku. It just seemed like it was a whole scenario that didn't need to play out because there's no way this big monster should be that strong compared to them. Based on what we've seen before, we've seen Goku knock big creatures out like this by just punching them one time, but whatever, they're trying to create tension. So Goku rescues Pansy, but they lose the shit. Whatever. Anyway, okay, so they lose the shit. Now they briefly say, oh, you know what? We can use this as an opportunity. Right. And they thought maybe it ate the Dragon Ball, but it didn't. And they were freaking out at the possibility of that. Well, even if that thing had eaten the Dragon Ball, they could have just blasted it to pieces and they would have gotten the Dragon Ball back. So once again, you're creating tension and suspense in places where it's not necessary because we already know these characters in this world well enough to know that that's not a real threat. So why are we seeing it? Okay. So then they decide to travel. So now everyone's flying. Something they could have done this entire series. But now that this world does not have the heavy air, so they can do it. They decide they're going to hold up and try to wait for Vegeta and the others to catch up. Never mind the fact that they just left them. But now it's time for them to wait for them to catch up. Well, that makes sense. It doesn't. And also, it's really, really convenient that they happen to stop right in front of the home planet of the Namekians. It's like, oh, well, it's a good thing that planet's right there. Let's just wait there for them. What Daima is feeling like to me is that someone, probably Toriyama, had some really cool ideas, concepts like, oh, I really would love to show the Namekian home world. I'd really love to show the demon world since we talked about it. I had this idea of these 3 warriors whose jobs it is to protect the Dragon Balls, right? I have this idea of Supreme Kai's backstory. He has a brother and a sister, and King Deborah, we get to see where he came from, right? Conceptually, all of those sound like really good ideas, right? Like if I just pitched that to you and I said all that stuff, you'd be like, hell yeah, man. But what happened was they had a team of writers who didn't know how to find interesting ways to get to those points. So it's like they just made a timeline with all these interesting concepts and then filled in the in-between stuff with just bullshit just to get them to A to B. Well, that's not an interesting story. That's not interesting. It's interesting is if you can find a creative and cool and fun and engaging way to get them from A to B. But they're not doing that here. They're just breaking them up A to B, B to C, C to D, and filling it in with a bunch of nonsense. Once again, it's just really convenient that they happen to just land and just run right upon the original Namekian homeworld. Anyway, we go back to Majin Ku, who is still getting his ass whooped by this Tamagami. Okay. And I'm not going to talk much more about this because it's not, it's kind of a waste of time right now. I mean, all we're learning here is that this Majin Ku may not be as big of a deal as they kind of played him up to be a little bit. And the Tamagami is pretty strong. So anyway, so they go to this old Namekian planet, and they're talking about the fact that it looks just like Planet Namek, like the one in their universe. And they're saying that, well, the Namekians probably took some of the trees with them, and that's why it looks the same. Once again, conceptually, I don't have a problem with this. I don't have a problem with them visiting the Namekian home world, and especially if it leads to something cool and something that gives us some more insight, maybe into Piccolo and the Dragon Balls and everything like that. And maybe we'll get that, maybe. But right now, it's just kind of a stopping point. Goku mentions how hungry he is because for some reason during this series, they have to remind us of that every single episode. Okay. So, I was wondering when these things were going to make an unwelcome return. Okay, remember the little fusion bugs and the rejuvenation bugs or whatever they call revive or whatever bullshit? It's basically just sensu beans, okay, but in the demon world. So Goku remembers that he has these, and we're not presented with any information here that leads us to believe that he really needs to take one of these right now. It's not like he's winded. It's not like he's injured. It's not like he's hurt. He's just hungry. So he just eats one just because he's hungry. Imagine just eating a sensu bean just because you're hungry. Those characters would have never done that, right? Like, this just reminds me of the stakes that Dragon Ball Z had. If you had a couple of sensu beans, man, you held on to those things until it was absolutely necessary. There's no way in hell you were eating a sensu bean just because you were hungry. That thing was going to be there as a last resort if you got your ass whooped. Goku's just eating this thing just because he's hungry. And I think it just feels like the writers are just trying to remind us, remember that this is a thing. Remember, he has these. So that in 3 episodes, when it comes back around, we can say, we reminded them about it. But is there any real reason in this moment that he needs to eat one of those? No, he just does it because he's hungry. Okay, guess we're just supposed to accept that. You guys are probably saying, gosh, Tim, man, you're really nitpicking the shit out of this show. Well, hey, you know what? That's why I'm ending the podcast, because this is what it's evolved into. I mean, if they're going to give me this kind of bullshit, then I have to call it out for what it is. And that's just what it is. And once again, it's okay to have bad moments every now and then. It's okay to have moments that don't make sense in a show. Well, I wouldn't argue that it's okay, but it's not uncommon, right? But the past 80% of this series has been this. So I can't let anything slide. I would let this slide if the other episodes had been good. But nope. Anyway, so they realize that it looks abandoned, right? And the belief here is that no one else would be here because the Namekians left. As we know, they went on to other planets and restarted and everything like that. Okay. So Goku realizes that Vegeta and the crew are nearby, so he decides to fly off and warn them about the Kraken. But I don't think we really get anything else worthwhile in this scene. I mean, we're just kind of reminded by Piccolo that he's never been here. And, I think as fans and viewers of the show, clearly we know that. He was born and raised on Earth. He hadn't even been to planet Namek yet. So certainly he hadn't been to this place. So I'm not sure how the characters on the show don't know that. But maybe it's just supposed to be just a reminder for the audience. So, the Kraken comes out, tries to eat it. No success. Yada, yada, yada. Another pointless moment there. We go back to Majin Buu, who's decided, hey, that's a wrap. Really, once again, really love the design of this Tamagami. He looks really, really cool standing there with a sword and everything. I actually really like him. I didn't mind the other one, but I think this one's going to be pretty cool when it's all said and done. So, Majin Buu is done. They fly away. Arensu is saying that you're pretty much unemployed because you just were pointless and useless and everything else. And, that's totally fair. But, you know what? You created him. So what does that say about you? Shit. You're gonna bust his chops? He was only given what you gave him. Anyway, so the rest of the crew lands on the old planet Namek. Goku is saying, Piccolo, you must have missed this place. I just don't feel like I don't feel like Goku would say that. You can't. This is the Goku that we got in Dragon Ball Z. Certainly not Kai, okay, but certainly the Funimation original dub would not be this aloof. I mean, he was there. I mean, when Piccolo was born, essentially. I don't know how much of that, I don't remember how much of that he saw. But he killed Demon King Piccolo, and then little Piccolo was born. So clearly he's never been to this place. So why would he even say that? Why would he? He's like, you must miss this place, Piccolo. It's like, wait a minute. Why are you acting like you just met Piccolo? I don't know, man. Whoever's in charge of continuity over at Toei needs to be fired, because some of this stuff just doesn't feel like these characters, and the way they're acting and stuff that they're saying just doesn't really align with stuff we've seen already. Now, what's fine is Piccolo saying, hey, something feels very familiar about this, right? That should be a thing. Just from him being a Namekian and that being his home world, he did fuse with Nail. There's Kami is still inside of there. Whatever he remembered from King Piccolo, just all that knowledge, history, ancestry, whatever might make him feel something in this moment. And I think that's totally fine. Now, I suppose the most interesting part, and we're going to skip some of this because a lot of this is just them reminding us of stuff we already know. They're just telling Bulma, oh, Supreme Kai's real name is Nahari. Well, we already know that as an audience, so I don't know why they feel the need to tell the other characters about this stuff. But the most interesting thing would be the backstory, right? Which Goku says, no, I'd be fine with skipping that. Which was kind of funny when he said that. Because I was thinking the same thing. It's like, yeah, at this point, man, just skip it. What's the point? But I'm glad they didn't skip it, because this is the kind of stuff that I wanted, right? We want to know more about the story here and the history of this, because Supreme Kai has been this mysterious character for so long, and they made him seem like he was such a badass, and then he ended up not being one, and now they're trying to make up for that, maybe explain a little bit more about him, and I appreciate that. Also the Kais and exactly how they work and what their purposes are, and etc. It's another thing that's been a little bit uncharted. So If we get a little bit of backstory on it here, I appreciate that. So we learned that there was a good supreme demon king at one point. He wanted to expand the demon realm, so he ordered the powerful Super Majin Rimus to create the universes. Okay? And Vegeta says, and who is Rimus? And then they say, he is the supreme, what's the word here? I don't want to mess this up. Let's see. And who is Rimus? The highest authority over all universes. Okay, now let's take a pause for the cause here. Obviously, I don't remember everything because Dragon Ball Super was 41 episodes. But it was my understanding that Grand Zeno was the supreme being over all universes. Okay, and now they're telling us that it's this being called Majin Rimus. Okay, now once again, I don't remember everything. I could be forgetting some minor detail, something they threw out in Dragon Ball Super. Now, and here's the thing, Dragon Ball Super takes place after this, right? So is it possible that at this moment, Supreme Kai thinks that Rimus is the supreme ruler of all the universes and he doesn't know about Grand Zeno? That is possible, yes. But I also don't remember what happened in Super. So maybe there's a scene in Super where he mentioned that he did know. I don't know. But also, he's a supreme guy. He's supposed to know this kind of shit, right? So I'm not sure if this is a direct conflict with Grand Zeno or not, but it just stood out to me when they said it. Okay. And it's possible that I'm forgetting something about Grand Zeno because once again, it's been a long time since I watched Super. Okay, but they mentioned the fact that more and more universes were created. The Majin spread out and just started developing new universes. And Rimus designated a select group of Glens to oversee the other Majin settlers as Supreme Kais. So we get a little bit of an explanation here of what Supreme Kais are and, you know, how they were designated. Now, we don't know exactly how they were selected individually, why the Glen species was chosen for this. Maybe it was the fact that they were born from trees and there was only a handful of them or something like that. And maybe we'll get some more information about that later on, but we at least get this. And I like this shot of all the Supreme Kais because the continuity here lines up. We see Gawasu back there. I think that's Gawasu in the top left. And that's great because of continuity, because we find out later that he's the Supreme Kai of was it Universe 8 or something? I forget. Okay. We also have the quote unquote fat Kai, the one that Boo absorbs to become the fatter version of Boo. So that continuity checks out. So I don't mind this. I mean, this is what I like. This is what we want. Now, it's coming across in a very expository sort of way where he's just standing there explaining it. But at least we do get to see some stuff too. If they put the visuals there as well, then it's okay. So Bulma asks a very important question here. Does that mean we're all descended from Majin? And he said, Supreme Kai says, not everything. Many life forms will only come into being later. And I'm glad that they made that distinction, because he also mentions the fact that, for example, Earthlings and Saiyans both originated in your universe. So I think that there's just a nice, clean way of not muddying up any of the other established canon that they may have already talked about in one of these other movies or in the manga, as far as the origin of the Saiyans and the origin of humans and Earthlings. Because I think had they said here, oh yeah, they were all created by Majin, that would have somehow created a plot hole somewhere else. Okay, so they just said, not everybody, but most of it. Okay, cool, fair enough. So, yeah. And we get a little bit of backstory about the, you used to be able to travel between worlds pretty easily at one point in time, but they were afraid of invaders, so they decided to create Sir Warp and the gates. And I'm not sure that this part of it really matters much to the story. Supreme Kai says that he was one who stayed. He didn't leave, and he endured the, Abura's cruel reign. Most of the others revolted and fled, settling in outside realms. And then shortly after that, he was selected as Supreme Kai. Now, once again, not the worst little backstory. I would have preferred that they just, instead of doing this series, man, they could have just done a special where they just showed us all that stuff. Let me see the Dragon Ball special where they tell the story of Supreme Kai, aka Nahare, how he became a Supreme Kai, everything leading up to him fighting Bobbity and Bibbity for the first time, sealing Boo in the ball. I want to see that. I mean, I think the little story that they pitched here is a lot more interesting than what we're getting in Daima. I understand they did Daima as a anniversary celebration of Dragon Ball, but I'd also like to see a special where they just explain and show all this stuff Supreme Kai is talking about. Let's see it. Because that could be pretty interesting to watch, I think. I mean, I certainly, once again, the moments until, like, it's almost like what they did with the history of Trunks. They introduced that character and then they went back and showed how he got to that point with the history of Trunks. I would love the history of Shin, aka Nahare. They should just start a new mini-series called The History of, and then they do Shin one episode, and then another episode they do, I don't know, who else is an interesting, character that we haven't spent we might even have to jump into like Hit or one of those characters or something like that. But I think that would have been a cool thing to see. Because this idea of them growing from trees, I mean, this could be pretty interesting stuff. Although, once again, this is the Dragon Ball world, so they just make up whatever they want. But hopefully what they make up is interesting. Now, there's a little bit of a, once again, some of these characters are just now learning that Degasu and Aransu are Supreme Kai's brother and sister. We already know that, of course. So I'm not sure why they're spending time talking about it. So then, yeah, they all go get on the plane. And now they're going to let Glorio fly because he's more familiar with the area. Okay. And at the very last moment here, this old Namekian dude shows up, and that's where the episode ends. And I don't usually talk about the little post-credit thing because it doesn't really matter most of the time, but we do see Vegeta fighting a Tamagami, so that alone has me somewhat excited for the next episode. But other than that, it all remains to be seen. So that's what I'm saying. I would ask you what you're saying, but this is the last episode. So you can send me an email if you want to. At email at rockthedragonpodcast@gmail.com. And if I decide to return with an episode sometime in the future and it's still a relevant question, I'll read it. And if not, the very least, I will respond directly to your email about it. Okay. So that about does it, guys. I really don't have anything else to talk about. I do want to just take a quick second and just thank all of you that have listened and came back and decided to check out this podcast because you were a fan of the previous one. I took a big risk coming back essentially out of nowhere with a brand new podcast to cover a show that I wasn't too sure about. I wasn't sure if anyone's going to watch this show. I knew a lot of people weren't crazy about the idea, the concept of them being turned into kids with all the limitations about the streaming and where it's airing and all of that kind of stuff. I knew I was taking a massive risk coming out and doing a new podcast with this. And I was prepared for the possibility that I was not going to make it the full 20 episodes. I mean, I think I probably even said that somewhere in episode 1 or 2 of the podcast. So I'm just glad and proud of myself for making it to 10 episodes, because it is not easy sitting here talking to yourself for an hour or so every single week. and trying to be entertaining and fun to listen to and all that kind of stuff. So I want to give out a big shout out to those of you who left reviews, sent me emails, left comments, subscribed, shared, etc. Because you guys kept me going for 10 episodes. So don't think that you didn't do anything. I appreciate every single one of you guys that did return and did decide to listen to the podcast. I just didn't see the amount of growth that I would have liked to have seen for me to continue doing something like this, but that's okay. I mean, it's just how it happens sometimes. All right. So with that being said, once again, I do reserve the right to return whenever I wish with another episode. So make sure you stay subscribed. Okay. So in the meantime, I'm not going to give some long, drawn out, sad goodbye here because it's not goodbye. I'll see you later. So until next time, for Rock the Dragon, a Dragon Ball Daima podcast, I'm Tim Bridgewater. I will see you guys at some point in the future if we're all lucky and just blessed, quote unquote, to remain alive. Keep on rocking the dragon.